On a freezing November night in Iowa, a young man slipped out of his home barefoot and vanished into the dark. For 10 years, no one knew he was just a few blocks away, silently decaying behind a supermarket freezer, while life carried on just inches from his body. This case is about a young man named Larry Murillo-Moncada who walked out into the cold Iowa night and was never seen alive again. It began on November 27, 2009, in the quiet town of Council Bluffs. A winter storm had passed through the region, leaving the streets coated in ice and the air brittle with cold. Inside a modest home, just past midnight, raised voices pierced the silence. Larry had gotten into another argument with his parents. The shouting was loud enough to wake the neighbors. Larry, 25 years old and still living at home, had struggled for years with severe depression and episodes of auditory hallucinations. That night, something broke inside him. He bolted from the house wearing no shoes and no coat. He carried nothing, no phone, no keys, not even socks. The door slammed behind him and the night swallowed him whole. His parents did not panic at first. Larry had left before and usually came back within a day or two. They assumed this time would be no different. But the next morning came and Larry did not return. The snow was thick and undisturbed. No signs of movement, no footprints. The days passed and concern grew into dread. Flyers went up. Police were notified. Searches were organized. But no one thought to look inside the shuttered, no-frills grocery store where Larry once worked. No one guessed that he might have returned there on foot in the freezing dark. And no one could imagine what had happened inside those cold and echoing walls. The cold had teeth that night, the kind of cold that sinks past your skin and presses into your bones. Larry Murillo-Moncada disappeared into it without even a jacket. As the frost glazed the windows of his family's home in Council Bluffs, his mother and father sat in quiet disbelief. They had argued with their son before. He had walked out before. But this time, the silence that followed felt different. It was too still, too long. The snow outside remained untouched. No calls came, no knocks at the door, and the boy who had run into the night seemed to have vanished into thin air. By morning, the wind had picked up again. The neighborhood lay wrapped in white, and the streets were near silent. Larry's father stepped outside and scanned the yard. There were no footprints on the driveway, no trails through the backyard. Just smooth, undisturbed snow and a creeping sense of dread that began to settle into the house. Still, the family held on to hope. Maybe he had gone to a friend's place. Maybe he had taken shelter somewhere nearby. But as the hours passed, the maybes began to rot. When Larry did not return by the second night, his parents called the police. Officers came and took down the information: age, height, what he was wearing, what he had been going through. They asked the usual questions. Was there trouble at home? Did he have a history of running away? Was he suicidal? Larry had battled depression since he was a teenager. He had been prescribed medication, but the results were uneven. He had spoken of hearing voices. Sometimes he would tell his mother he heard her calling him from rooms where she was not. He had become fixated on sweets and sugar. His hallucinations often urged him to eat more of them. It was a strange and sad pattern his family had grown used to navigating. But this time, there was no pattern. Larry had simply disappeared. The police searched the area in widening circles. They walked the woods and the alleys. They questioned co-workers and extended family. They checked local hospitals and shelters. But no one had seen him. No one had heard from him. His phone had been left behind. His wallet too. Even his shoes. The cold alone would have been dangerous. And the storm that had passed through days earlier had turned much of the terrain into ice and mud. Still, there was no sign of distress, no blood, no torn clothes, no dropped belongings, just silence. In desperation, the family thought about the places Larry used to visit. There was the no-frills supermarket where he had worked part-time for years, a faded building with flickering lights and narrow aisles, the kind of place that always seemed dim no matter the time of day. Larry had liked working there. He said it kept him grounded. He liked the routine, the repetition, the way the fluorescent lights hummed above the shelves. The manager there told police that Larry had not been scheduled to work the day he disappeared. No one remembered seeing him. The building was closed not long after and eventually forgotten. Seasons passed, then years. Life slowly moved forward, but but the questions remained heavy. Larry's case faded into the background, like so many other cold files. His parents tried to keep his name alive. They held out hope that he might still be alive, that he had simply lost his way. But beneath the surface, that hope had started to crack. It was hard to believe someone could just vanish. Harder still to accept that the world could move on without answers. It wasn't until 2019 that the silence finally broke. A demolition crew was sent to tear down the long-abandoned No Frills store. The supermarket had sat empty for years. Its windows were darkened with dust, and its interior stripped of life. As workers moved through the gutted store, they reached the walk-in freezer area. The machines had long since stopped humming. When they began disassembling the equipment, they noticed something lodged behind the freezer unit. The gap was narrow, less than 2 feet wide, just enough space for something to fall and remain hidden. One of the workers looked in and froze. There, in the shadows, was a body. It had been there for nearly a decade. The airless, freezing space had preserved the remains in a mummified state. A forensics team was called. Police sealed off the scene. The clothes matched what Larry was last seen wearing. DNA tests confirmed it. It was him. He had been there the whole time, not far from home, not buried in some remote field, but trapped in the very place he had once felt safe, a place no one had thought to search. Investigators believe Larry had returned to the store after leaving home that night, possibly looking for shelter, possibly looking for peace. It was common knowledge among former employees that some workers used the area above the freezer as a makeshift break space. There were crates up there, boxes, a place to sit and disappear for a few minutes. Larry may have climbed up and slipped. The fall was only a few feet, but the space was tight, too tight to crawl back out. And the noise of the compressors running may have drowned out any cries for help. He likely died alone, cold, trapped, waiting in a place where no one thought to look. That discovery shattered what little hope remained. It also reopened a deep sense of grief. Larry had not run away. He had not chosen to vanish. He had simply been lost and left unheard. The building had held his secret for nearly 10 years, and only when it came down did the truth finally surface. The air inside the abandoned supermarket was still and stale. Dust clung to the fluorescent light fixtures. The checkout lane sat stripped and lifeless. The building had been gutted of its products and purpose, but the bones remained. In early 2019, nearly a decade after it had closed, a demolition crew stepped inside to begin tearing it down. Most of them knew nothing about the missing man who once worked there. To them, it was just another decaying structure scheduled for removal, until they reached the back of the store. The freezer units loomed large against the far wall, industrial metal boxes bolted in place since the store first opened. Each stood nearly ceiling high and was tucked into the architecture like a rib cage. The workers began dismantling the top sections first, starting with the shelving and outer framework. As they peeled back the upper panels, someone noticed a gap. It was narrow and deep, a vertical shaft of space no more than 18 inches wide. The kind of space meant to be inaccessible, the kind of space no one ever thought to check. One of the crew leaned in with a flashlight. The beam slid through the darkness and caught on something unnatural, a shape, human, wedged between the back of the cooler and the wall. The worker froze. His voice cracked when he called out for the others. What they saw was beyond anything they were prepared for. A body dried and mummified, still clothed in jeans and a sweatshirt, now clinging to sunken limbs. It looked like it had been there for years. The police arrived within the hour. The building was sealed. Crime scene tape stretched across the loading docks, and emergency lights bathed the walls in red and blue. Forensic investigators suited up and entered the cold, dark space. They moved slowly and carefully, documenting every inch of the hidden gap. The body had clearly not been placed there. It had fallen or slipped. The position was awkward, arms pulled close, legs slightly bent, as if the person had tried to move, tried to twist free, but found no space to escape. Back at the lab, DNA testing began. The clothing had already raised suspicions. The pants matched those Larry Murillo-Moncada had been wearing when he vanished in 2009. The shoes were missing, but that detail made the connection even stronger. Larry had left home barefoot in a fit of distress. His parents had told police that night he took nothing with him. No phone, no jacket, no wallet, just raw emotion and a thin layer of clothes against the freezing night. When the DNA results returned, the confirmation was immediate. The remains belonged to Larry. After nearly 10 years of silence and searching, the mystery cracked open in an instant. The body was found in the one place no one had searched, a place that had been locked up and forgotten, a place Larry once called safe. Detectives began reconstructing the timeline. They revisited interviews with former co-workers. Some remembered employees climbing onto the freezer units during breaks. The top had crates and empty boxes, a quiet place to sit alone. Larry may have come back to the store that night. The familiarity might have felt comforting. He could have used a hidden entrance, climbed up to that old break spot, sat for a moment, then lost his balance. Investigators believe he slipped into the gap, 18 inches wide. No ladder, no handle, no solid foothold. He fell into darkness, trapped between the wall and the massive unit. The compressors likely roared to life, as they always had, muffling any sound. Larry could have screamed for hours and no one would have heard him. He was boxed in by cold steel and cinder block, alone in pitch black. With every passing minute, the oxygen would have thinned. Panic would have risen. His arms may have flailed and pushed, but the walls gave no space. He died there, possibly from positional asphyxia, possibly from dehydration, possibly from hypothermia. It did not matter in the end. The result was the same. The space became a tomb. The hum of machinery slowly faded as the building closed. No one thought to search there. No one imagined a man could be missing for 10 years in the very place he once punched a time card. The pain of that truth broke something in his family. His mother wept when told. She had held on to hope even after all those years. His father sat silent, unable to speak. What they feared was confirmed, but what they never expected was how close he had been. How long he had waited, how quietly he had disappeared. The case shocked the town and spread across headlines nationwide. The story of a man hidden behind a freezer in a grocery store captured the morbid disbelief of a country. It was not a violent crime. It was not a grand conspiracy. It was something quieter, more tragic. A man lost in the cracks of a system that never saw him, and a death so slow, so still, so entirely preventable that it left behind more questions than comfort. This was the moment everything changed. The moment Larry was found, not on a distant highway or in an unmarked grave, but behind the walls of a place he once knew, waiting to be heard, waiting to be seen. Larry was buried not long after the discovery. There was no trial, no one to blame, no final confrontation. The official reports called it an accident, a misstep, a tragedy born of timing and silence. The freezer unit was removed, the gap behind it sealed, the building demolished to make way for something new. But the air in that space held something that could not be cleared, something colder than concrete and harder than time. His parents moved slowly in interviews, their voices thin, their eyes fixed somewhere just beyond the camera. They spoke of his kindness, his sadness, his childhood, how he used to hum to himself when he cleaned his room, how he always finished his chores even when the voices were loud. They wondered aloud how long he had been alive inside that wall, whether he had screamed, whether anyone walked by and never knew. Nothing was found with him, no note, no message, only the clothes he wore that night and the silence he left behind. The store had continued to operate for years, with his body hidden in its walls. Customers shopped for milk and bread feet from where he had been trapped. Employees restocked shelves while compressors hummed over his final breaths. The machine noise that once comforted him had drowned him out completely. There are no plaques or memorials where he was found. The parking lot is still cracked. Weeds push through the concrete. Wind rattles through what remains of the chain link fence. It looks like any other forgotten space. But if you stand there long enough, the cold still finds you. And for a moment, the silence feels heavier than it should. The store remained open for years, while Larry's body lay just beyond a wall. No employee ever reported strange smells. No technician noticed the gap. No inspection flagged the cooler's hollow space. Surveillance footage from that night was never found. His route from home to the store was never traced. The break area above the freezer was never mentioned in early interviews. And when the building came down, the silence came with it. Only the echo of a single footprintless night remains.